Two doors down. It's about time. There's an old adage, time waits for no one, which means we can't control it. However, we do set priorities that rarely represent the best use of time.
Dana Chandler didn't commit double murder, and no evidence proved she did. But a prosecutor who wanted to win at any cost invented evidence that misled the jury, and Dana was found guilty. She spent over a decade behind bars fighting for her freedom. Even after her conviction was overturned, Dana faced the prospect of a retrial, living each moment with the uncertainty of a system that had failed her once before. The second trial resulted in a mistrial and freed Dana on bond. Her third trial is scheduled for 2025. Dana's story is a stark illustration of living on borrowed time, where every second is a battle for justice and every moment is haunted by the question, how do you reclaim the years that were taken from you?
So Dana is she was what, incarcerated?
She was incarcerated at Topeka Correctional Facility, which is the state prison that I was at.
You were in Topeka,
but
I see.
not at the same time. I think I was gone before she got there.
But is she innocent?
Well, there is no evidence that proves the case, and the prosecutor, so her ex-husband and his fiance were killed inside their home, and Dana and her husband did have a tumultuous divorce, a contentious divorce. So obviously, the spouse is always the first suspect that the police go after. But they didn't have any evidence. And she lived in Colorado. They were murdered near Topeka, Kansas. And there was no evidence tying her to the crime or tying her to the scene of the crime or even being in Kansas. But the prosecutor, Jackie Spradling, repeatedly made arguments to the jury that lacked any evidentiary support. This is from the Supreme Court ruling in Kansas. Intentionally lied to this court in her briefs and in oral arguments, and made false statements during the disciplinary investigation. The result was that Spradling can no longer practice law in Kansas, and she has been disbarred. And there's been more evidence presented since then that she has made up and misled
So she's the
court.
prosecutor.
She's the prosecutor.
All right, and so let me recap a little bit here. So there's no evidence proving that she did the crime, that Dana did the crime, but there's also no evidence that she has been exonerated. Is that correct?
That's correct. And so they're retrying her case.
And they're going to they're still trying to get after her now.
Yes.
But in the meantime, the prosecutor has been sort of proven to be sort of corrupt, and they've censured her and disbarred her.
And she's not allowed to practice in the state of Kansas.
So not just
right.
as a prosecutor, but
right.
as any attorney.
That's
she's
correct.
Been disbarred. Okay.
That's correct.
So that's interesting because I think that speaks to cognitive dissonance, which is pride. Mm-hmm. And I think we have lots of prosecutors that refuse to repent. They know that a defendant has been exonerated by evidence, and they intentionally hide it. They do everything they can.
Yeah. When they've been proven wrong, they refuse to accept that they were wrong. They try to piece together a case from what's left.
And the justice system condones it, and it's just simply not designed to exonerate anybody that's innocent.
That's correct. That's not the purpose of our justice system, to exonerate the innocent.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think it would be a better justice system if it was.
If it was, yeah.
Because we should only put guilty people in prison. So
right.
Dana is, luckily she's out on bond now. After her second trial ended in a mistrial, they did release her on bond. So she's had time to be out of prison and live a normal life. Well, as normal as you can with something like this hanging over your head. And she's preparing for her third trial in 2025. And I think her defense team is pretty confident that they're going to win, and she'll be found innocent and set free of this whole fiasco.
Do we have any leads that we can add to the show notes so that other people can look up this case?
Well, I could. Yes, there's a lot of information out there, so I'll add some information.
You'll add some. Good.
Yeah.
All right. So today's podcast, we're talking about borrowed time, and borrowed time. There's a lot of baggage to unpack here to try to understand borrowed time. But in some of my research, I actually went to YouTube and I just simply did a search for borrowed time, and there were some pop culture kind of things that I thought maybe were interesting, so I explored them. As it turns out, some of them I enjoyed and some of them I did not. But just to mention a few, these are at the top. There's one called Cueshe, Cueshe, was a band, and they had a song called Borrowed Time. Encourage people to go and take a look at that. There was a band in the 70s that I really enjoyed, and they sang a couple of big songs like Come Sail Away, Come Sail Away. And there's a Mr. Roboto, Origato, Mr. Roboto. Pretty cool songs. Well, they sang a song called Borrowed Time, and I wasn't impressed. It kind of left me flat. But then there's the Fugees. There was a guy named Wyclef Jean who came from Haiti. He's French-speaking black fella that moved to New Jersey and started a band and sang a song called Borrowed Time. And in that video I watched, the song was a little bit better. I kind of liked it. But he was playing a piano in a desert, and the piano was on fire.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
And the metaphor was not lost on me.
You better hurry up and get your music done because you're running out of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was kind of cool. So anyway, as I was doing more research, I also found a book, and this is a book called Indianapolis, The True Story of the Worst Sea Disaster in U.S. Naval History, and after the 50-year fight to exonerate an innocent man. So the captain of the ship was brought up on court-martial charges, but just wanted to read a little excerpt from the back cover. Just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, days after delivering the components of the atomic bomb from California to the Pacific Islands in the most highly classified naval mission of World War II, USS Indianapolis is sailing alone in the center of the Philippine Sea when she is struck by two Japanese torpedoes, sinking it within minutes. Some 300 men go down with the ship. Nearly 900 make it into the water alive. For the next 5 nights and 4 days, almost 300 miles from the nearest land, the men battle injuries, sharks, dehydration, insanity, and eventually each other.
5 days in the desert, in the water.
Only 316 survive.
Out of 900 that went into the water.
Right, and 300 that went down with the ship. So you're looking at 1,200 people started with borrowed time. 300 of them right away lost to the sinking of the ship.
I think I'd rather been one of those.
And then another 600 died over the next 5 days while they were battling just to stay alive. 900 of them just floating in the water out in the middle of the ocean, fighting against each other and against sharks and going crazy and everything else. And then 300 of them actually lived to come back to the States.
That is pretty crazy.
And so I would encourage people to just, enjoy the book. It kind of speaks to borrowed time in a lot of different ways. So let's see. So borrowed time. I think borrowed time is a dark concept. And there's a bit of a controversy between what you understand as borrowed time and what I understand as borrowed time. And the way I see it is it's a diagnosis or a prognosis, and that you have a certain amount of time to live. And so at the end of that, there's a deadline. You're literally not going to live much longer. So what are you going to do with that extra time? And I think that has a really dark theme to it. That has a really dark theme to it. and I just I don't feel that my version of borrowed time is there's not a whole lot of, I don't know, hope, I guess. What do you think?
Well, I think I have a more expanded idea of borrowed time. And mine is filled with hope because I believe if you face some kind of life crisis, it could be a stroke, it could be going to prison, it could be a high speed car chase that you're in, or in a car crash, or you have some kind of a traumatic brain injury. That is a moment where you realize your time is limited. And when you face death and still overcome it, I think that if you allow it to change your perspective, then it really becomes a positive thing in your life. And it becomes a catalyst that allows you to push forward and do something to change the world.
I like that you have a more positive view of it, more optimistic. I like that part, but it sounds like what you're saying is that for you, borrowed time is synonymous with second chances, which is that optimistic, positive view.
Well, it can be in synonymous. It also means you might have a certain amount of time to live. And so that is a possibility. But I just think that one of the options is that it can be second chances.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Now that you have a very short clock, what are you gonna go? What are you gonna do with it?
That's interesting. I mean, that's one of the questions that you have to ask. And I think if you realize you have a short clock, it certainly is going to make a change in the decisions that you make.
Well, I've been reading this book, and Toby, that I've been reading this book for about a year now. It's a fairly big book. It's over 500 pages long, and I'm approaching 500 pages here when I get to chapter 23, and it's called The Ides of March. This book was written by Adrian Goldsworthy, and it's called Life of a Colossus, which is all about Julius Caesar. And I found this kind of interesting. Caesar gave the impression to some of his friends that he did not wish to live any longer and took no precautions due to his failing health. Now, to me, that tells me that even Caesar, as massive a man as he was, and the way that we revere him, that even he knew that he was living on borrowed time.
Well, I think we all live on borrowed time, don't we?
I
We
think so.
just sometimes we know how borrowed it really is.
Yes, right. Yeah, I agree.
So the United States now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. By far, it's not even close, with 2.2 million citizens in prison or jail. That's the US statistics. This phenomenon has generally been driven by changes in laws, policing and
Policing.
sentencing, not by changes in behavior. So that's kind of interesting. So we're not saying that we have a country that commits more crime or there's been a big, huge uptake in crime. It just means that we're throwing people in jail left and right. And I'm not sure that's something to be proud of.
So what you're saying is it's not criminals and the behavior of our citizens that has gone downhill. It's that the administration is taking a more aggressive approach about throwing people in jail,
Yes.
even if they're not.
Yeah, they think they're solving problems by throwing people in jail, and they're not solving a problem. They're just ripping a band-aid off.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and these results have disproportionately impacted poor and disenfranchised communities. In contrast, these historic changes remain nearly invisible to many Americans. And we know for a fact that that's intentional. They put prisons places where people don't even come across them in their daily life.
Right.
And people forget that they're there and that there's
Right.
people living behind those bars.
We recently visited Philadelphia, and in the middle of the city, there were tons of historic things to explore. And we actually paid for a bus ticket that was an all-day pass where you could just jump on and off a bus. And one of the events that we went to was the Eastern State Penitentiary. Was once the most famous and expensive prison in the world, but stands today in ruin. A haunting world of crumbling cell blocks and empty guard towers, known for its grand architecture and strict discipline. This was the world's first true penitentiary, a prison designed to inspire penitence or true regret in the hearts of prisoners. So
it was all about punishment. How miserable can we make you so you don't want to come back?
Yeah.
And it was pretty miserable.
Yeah, and who wants to be miserable? No air conditioning, and
well, in this particular prison, their system was that you weren't allowed to talk.
Yeah.
You couldn't make any noise.
It wasn't just the facility itself; it was the administration of it that was pretty dark. What I liked about it is that they had taken this historic site and they not only turned it into sort of a state park in a way, that it's a landmark that people can go and see what it looked like originally, but at the same time they turned it into an artistic kind of,
and also civil rights kind of a thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
Right.
But this particular prison once held many of America's most notorious criminals, including bank robber Slick Willie Sutton and Al Capone. And we saw Al Capone's prison cell, which was amazing. I mean, this was a horrid place. Just, there was no creature comforts at all.
Except for his cell.
And he had carpet and a desk and a bed.
It looked like a hotel.
It looked like a hotel room.
Not a bad hotel
and
either.
It's true. That's how he had it in there. That's how much pull Al Capone had. He could have a hotel room inside the prison.
Yeah, so some extra
and his door
privilege
wasn't
that comes
locked
with his
most
crime.
of the time.
Yeah.
He was free to go where he wanted.
Interesting.
So this Eastern State Penitentiary, the interesting thing about it is that it's located right downtown, just 5 blocks from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which, is not the case today. When they build prisons today, they do build them out in the boonies somewhere.
Yeah, I'll tell you we've been to a couple of different prisons. Some because we're visiting and having a good time on a trip somewhere, and other times we had other reasons for visiting prison.
That's true.
Yeah, so I think inside the prison there was one cell that I liked a lot, and that was there was a cell that the artist that had taken over this cell had disassembled an entire car and then reassembled the car inside the cell of the prison.
Right, and this was not an inmate. He didn't do it while he was an inmate. There's one wing of the prison that they dedicated to give former inmates or people working with inmates license to put art projects in these cells.
Right.
Just to make people think as they toured.
But as an artist, what I liked what he did with that car being inside the cell is that while you're inside a prison cell, one of the things that you're just never going to see the light of day is you won't see yourself behind the wheel of a car. And there's not much more freeing kind of an event that the average person, a
symbol of freedom,
that the average people just take for granted. When you wake up in the morning and you go upstairs and you get in your car and you drive somewhere, that's pretty freeing. You have the ability to travel, but when you're in a prison cell, you don't. And so for this artist to reassemble an actual car inside the prison cell, there was some interesting metaphor to that.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I really liked the cell that there was a man who had done 10 years in federal prison. And during his time in federal prison, he created a landscape mural by painting on bed sheets. And he'd mail each one home. And that he created 39 panels for this landscape. And when he finished one, he'd mail it home to his brother. And then he'd start on the next one. So he never saw them all put together until he was finally released from prison. I don't know how you could remember what you put on what panel to make them all connect and tell a story.
He was an inmate and an artist.
Yes, he was.
And now they've taken all of those panels that he painted or however he created them, and they have them at this particular prison. This
Yes, installed as an art
yeah, as one of the
display in one of
exhibits.
the
Yeah.
cells. So you can actually walk into the prison and the mural is on all the walls and on the ceiling. And so, like, you're just inside of this landscape that he created. It's pretty cool.
Talk about Jess Perlitz.
Yeah, Jess Perlitz. This was really an interesting display that she had. She wondered if she could give the opportunity to incarcerated men and women from throughout the United States to sing one song and have that song heard, what would it be? And so she went to prisons and just visited people at random and asked them that question and then recorded the song that they sang to her. And when you walked up to this particular cell where her exhibit was installed, it was triggered by you walking up, and someone would start singing, and then someone else would sing their song, and someone else would sing a song, and then she started layering the songs on top of each other until finally, if you stood there long enough, you had this crescendo of all these songs all being sung by different people, different songs all at the same time, and it was just almost maddening, the noise. But it was also haunting and
I
beautiful.
I felt like the artist that made that exhibit did that on purpose because there's this element of hope in a song that somebody is singing, but just like being in prison, an inmate that has to put up with all the noises of a prison where there's people throughout the cell block that some are crying and some of them are screaming and some of them are claiming that they're innocent and other ones want to talk to an officer and other ones are accusing each other of things and some are playing, they just, there's so many different things that are all happening at once, and that noise never goes away, and it's
That's
just
true.
it drives a
The
person
noise
crazy.
in prison, it's never quiet. It's the noisiest place I've ever been. This particular prison location, though, they also have a social justice side. And they've put in a new exhibit called Prisons Today Questions in the Age of Mass Incarceration. And it has things that talk about criminal justice issues, and it shows personal connections to recent historic changes in the U.S. criminal justice system. And it asks questions of the people there, you know, enjoying this exhibit. And it suggests steps that they can take to help shape the evolution of the American criminal justice system moving forward. So I love that they're trying to do something about the prison problem that we have in the country, not just promote having more prisons.
It's pretty obvious that prisons and inmates, and especially innocent people that have been incarcerated, are near and dear to our hearts. And this podcast, this episode today, is about borrowed time, and inmates personify that in a pretty hearty way. Everybody lives on borrowed time, and
Well, come to think of it, I don't think anywhere else in our lives, well, maybe when a woman's pregnant and she has a countdown to these 9 months, but other than that, our life really isn't measured in a time. I mean, you have birthdays and things, but inmates have sentences and they count days off the calendar.
time is
It's
extremely
time.
important
Time
to
is,
inmates. Everybody that I've ever
yes.
talked to that was an inmate, they don't even express their sentences in years like all the rest of us do. They express it in months. So how many months do you have down?
Right, right. That's true.
Interesting. So on top of everything else, it's been pretty obvious that borrowed time is something that all of us are living with. And I found another book called The Darkest Dawn, and it was written by Thomas Goodrich. And on page 101, just to give a bit of context before I read this to you, this is words of the doctor that was trying to help Abraham Lincoln after he'd been shot. So here's a fatally wounded president with a gunshot wound to the head. And the doctor said this: I leaned forcibly forward directly over his body, thorax to thorax, face to face, and several times drew in a long breath, then forcibly breathed directly into his mouth and nostrils. After waiting a moment, I placed my ear over his thorax and found the action of the heart improving. I then watched for a short time and saw that the president could continue independent breathing and that instant death would not occur.
That's borrowed time.
That's crazy borrowed time. Now, most of borrowed time we think of, we've got, a day or a week or a month or a year. But even if it's just a few seconds, life is precious.
But Chris, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I have to ask this question. I feel like I should know the answer and I don't. What is a thorax?
I think it's one of those creatures in Dr. Seuss books.
I've heard it there. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that comes to mind.
No, I think thorax is. I think it's the body, the torso.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah, maybe.
Because maybe it's just the breastbone or thorax. The chest. I don't know, or where you breathe. I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up. But,
well, evidently Lincoln had one.
Well, I think we all do. But
and the doctor that was hovered over and had a thorax.
Now I'd like to know where mine is, so I'm going to find that out.
You're going to go explore your thorax,
I'm going to go explore it, yes. As we close this episode on Borrowed Time, we're reminded that time is the one thing we can never get back. For those like Dana Chandler and so many others who have been wrongly convicted or faced impossible odds, every day lived on borrowed time is a mix of urgency, resilience, and unyielding hope. Their stories challenge us to rethink how we value our own time and how we respond to the injustices that steal time from others.
I found a poem that sort of captures the essence of borrowed time. It's called The Quitter. It was by Robert W. Service. When you're lost in the wild, and you're scared as a child, and death looks you bang in the eye, and you're sore as a boil, it's according to Hoyle to cock your revolver and die. But the code of a man says fight all you can, and self-dissolution is barred. In hunger and woe, oh, it's easy to blow. It's the hell served for breakfast that's hard. You're sick of the game? Well, now that's a shame. You're young, and you're brave, and you're bright. You've had a raw deal, I know, but don't squeal. Buck up, do your damnedest, and fight. It's the plugging away that will win you the day, so don't be a piker, old pard. Just draw on your grit. It's so easy to quit. It's the keeping your chin up that's hard. It's easy to cry that you are beaten and die. It's easy to crawfish and crawl. But to fight and to fight when hope's out of sight, why, that's the best game of them all. And though you come out of each grueling bout, all broken, beaten, and scarred, just have one more try. It's dead easy to die. It's the keeping on living that's hard.
That's so true. The keeping on living is the hard part. And Chris, I just realized I had something I wanted to share with you, and it would have really fit in well with that Indianapolis story, but it didn't even pop into my head till just now. But my great-grandfather was in World War I, and he was on a ship in the Northern Sea, and the ship was torpedoed or bombed or something, but it sank. And my grandpa's name was Fred Unger, and he was an excellent swimmer. And so he swam for quite a while, and he managed to find some hunk of rock sticking out of the ocean and kind of clung onto this rock waiting for help. And help did finally come. A Navy ship came by and picked him up, and they took him to shore to a hospital, but he died of pneumonia and hypothermia. So he didn't make it home.
So the exposure got him in the end.
Yeah.
So while he was clinging to a rock out there, he was living on borrowed time too.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
And I just think that's the loneliest thing I've ever heard. To be at sea and lost. And
it seems to me that your last name should be Unger's daughter.
Ooh. Well, I guess it could.
I'm going to start calling you
Okay. All right. I'll have to learn how to spell it. Whether we're navigating personal struggles or advocating for change, let's remember the importance of making every moment count, not just for ourselves, but for those who've had so much taken away. We're all living on borrowed time. The real question is, what will we do with it? Chris, if you knew your days were numbered, how would you spend your remaining time?
This is interesting. I've thought about this a lot, especially recently. And I sort of have these two answers, and they're diametrically opposed answers. But on one hand, I feel like I live a principled life. I try to be a decent person, and that I don't feel that any of my conditions, my circumstances around me, including how much time I have left, should alter the way that I behave. I should be doing the same thing anyway. But on the other hand, I feel like the people that were on Flight 93 that had 18 minutes before their 5,000 pounds of jet fuel crashed into the Capitol building, they had an opportunity to sacrifice themselves in order to save thousands of people, and they immortalized themselves, they martyred themselves in order to sort of stand for the American spirit, I guess.
To go out in a blaze of glory, to make their time count.
And I feel like I am jealous. I only wish, I hope, then pray that someday I'll have the opportunity to go out in a blaze of glory like that. That's some pretty amazing stuff. So
that is interesting.
How about you?
I have been thinking about this a lot lately. Clock is ticking. I'm getting older. It's becoming more apparent that I'm in my waning time. And I think if I knew I had a certain amount of time to live, I would start writing letters to my grandkids. And I'd like to, I'd address them for different events in their lives. Their high school graduation, their college graduations, the day they get married, the day they have their first child, the day one of their parents dies. Events that they might struggle through, and I'd like to give them some love and some words of encouragement and advice to get through those times. And I think I'd start writing a bunch of letters.
Wow. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. But you could do that.
I think maybe I should start now. Yeah. Why am I going to wait?
Why wait, right?
Yeah.
You've got borrowed time. You might as well be spending it on some prioritization. Is where we're using, we can't do anything about time. Time sort of has us by the throat. But what we can do is we can dictate what we're going to use that time on, and that's priority. So that's pretty interesting.
I think I might.
So we want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you're living on borrowed time, or do you know someone whose story echoes this theme? Share your experiences, thoughts, and reflections with us. Use the hashtag 2DoorsBorrowedTime on social media to join the conversation. Your stories are powerful and they deserve to be heard. Let's build a community of voices that shine a light on what it means to navigate life with the urgency of borrowed time. We can't wait to hear from you.
Now, Chris and I have come up with this kind of fun idea. We have got 2 or 3 dozen topics for podcasts, and we've written each one of them on a little card, and we put them in a bowl. And at this point in our podcast, we're going to draw a card out. And so we'll know what our next topic is going to be. So, Chris, you want to pull out one of the cards and we'll know what our next topic is? Lifetimes. That's going to be interesting. So subscribe now to be notified when our next episode, Lifetimes, is released.
Okay, so now we're down to the final segment of our episode. This is my favorite, and it's about felony murder. So, Toby, what's felony murder?
It's a loophole.
Tell me more. Felony murder sounds like it makes sense. Shouldn't murderers be charged with felony murder?
Well, the question, shouldn't murderers be charged with felony murder, contains inaccuracies, because felony murder is not an event. It is the title of a legal concept. And this concept states, Anybody who participates in a felony offense is criminally liable for any deaths that occur during or in furtherance of that felony. In other words, you don't have to kill anybody to receive a conviction of felony murder, which carries the punishment of first-degree murder. In some cases, you don't even need to be present. This law made sense in 12th century Europe because murders were less solvable. But felony murder has been outlawed in every country except for the United States and Australia. Murderers should be charged with murder. Carjackers should be charged with carjacking. But if you commit a carjacking and your buddy kills someone, the felony murder law allows both of you to be charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison or even death.
Felony murder is a loophole because it doesn't require the prosecution to prove any intent.
To me, I think it's a lazy prosecution because the prosecutor doesn't have to do any work to get you convicted. They just have to prove that maybe you were somehow connected.
What I don't like about it is the whole concept of a loophole. I don't like loopholes. Loopholes are they're shady little secrets that are only available to a certain few, and everybody else
has to follow the rules,
covered by the administration or whatever, the system, the in this case the justice system. Everybody else is taken care of, but this felony murder thing, it puts people away that are otherwise innocent of murder. They weren't doing anything.
Well, I have a story for you that expands exactly on that. It's the story of Ryan Hawley, who received a life sentence because he loaned his car to his roommate. Even though the prosecution fully admits that the 21-year-old was sleeping miles away from the incident when the killing occurred, yet he was still sentenced to life in prison because of an outdated loophole law called felony murder.
You mean he wasn't involved in the crime, yet he received the same sentence as those who were there?
That's exactly right. And during his trial, his roommate that borrowed the car even said that Hawley didn't know they were going to kill anyone when he handed over his keys. None of them even knew they were going to kill anyone when they were asked to borrow his car. It just was an event that took a wrong turn.
So many inmates sentenced under felony murder rules are still in prison. So far, efforts to cap sentences under that law rather than give life sentences have failed.
This case, though, has somewhat of a happy ending. Florida's governor commuted Hawley's sentence to 25 years, and he was released just a few months ago. He wants to be an advocate to educate others about felony murder because this is a law that shouldn't be on the books in the United States.
So we've reached out to him, and
yes,
we're hoping that he responds,
yes,
so that we may have him on our podcast.
That's right.
Give him a voice and a platform to reach out to you
That's
folks.
exactly right. We hope to hear from him.
For those convicted of felony murder, the clock doesn't just tick, it steals. This part of our podcast is inspired by John Maynard, who was murdered by felony murder.
Wow, that says it all.
Thank you for allowing us to borrow your time for Two Doors Down. From inmates to outtakes, we hope today's discussion gave pause to reflect on what truly matters.
Chris, what is the interest rate on borrowed time, and who holds the note?
I think this, in some respects, I feel like this is a better question that you could answer since you have an accounting degree. However, I did want to mention that I like the idea that the older I get, the more time becomes valuable, and because the principle of the borrowed time is more valuable as I get older, I feel like the interest that I'd have to pay on that more valuable principle is going to be higher. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I think that the answer to the question, who holds the note on our time, is God. and I think God controls the time. Sometimes we don't understand his timing, but it's not ours to understand. And I think of the interest rate on borrowed time because I like the concept of borrowed time as being some event in my life that gives me the opportunity to change direction and do something that makes a difference. So the interest rate for me, a positive interest is a higher interest rate because really it's a return on an investment in this case, not a interest you're paying on a debt. So this borrowed time that I've earned through some life event, if I invest wisely in the time that I have left, I can create a higher interest rate on that time because it becomes more valuable and I leave something behind that other people can use.
So you're saying that there's more of a profit because the borrowed time has given you some incentive to make a bigger difference in
Right.
the world.
I've capitalized on it.
Interesting. Huh. Okay. If borrowed time resonates with you, share your thoughts. Hashtag 2Doors borrowed time.
Until next time, keep valuing every moment because in the end, we're all living on borrowed time.
2 Doors Down, where every second counts.